Hey guys, tonight we're going back to a time when deodorant didn't exist, soap was a luxury, and tossing your waste out the window was considered acceptable civic behavior. Yes, we're heading straight into the nostril-flaring, eye-watering world of medieval hygiene. And fair warning, you probably wouldn't survive this. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, leave a comment with where you're watching from and what time it is. I love seeing the sleepy little corners of the world coming together. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The first thing you notice is the smell. It hits you before you even open your eyes, like a stew made from damp straw, wood smoke, unwashed bodies, and something faintly pickled. It's morning, and the cobbled street beneath your feet is already alive with sound. Horse hooves clatter, a baby wails. Somewhere, a dog is either fighting a goose or having a religious awakening. Welcome to your typical day in a medieval town. You're standing just outside the wooden doorway of a thatched roof home. It's leaning slightly, as if it's tired of the century it's in. The windows are tiny, because glass is expensive. Instead, they're covered with parchment soaked in oil. It blocks the wind, but not the smell. Definitely not the smell. You take a careful step forward and nearly lose your shoe in something that you hope is just mud. It's not. Above you, someone casually tosses the contents of a chamber pot into the gutter. The splash zone is wide. You flinch. Your instincts are correct. This town is not OSHA approved. But oddly, no one else reacts. People are used to it. The baker across the road is already shaping loaves with bare hands. A merchant sharpens his knives on a leather strap tied to a post. Children play near a puddle you sincerely hope isn't sentient. Everyone is going about their day. It doesn't smell like a fermented barn. Because here's the thing, this is normal. You're in the 14th century, give or take, and urban sanitation is more of a suggestion than a system. There are no sewers, no garbage trucks. Most homes don't have their own water supply, and the local river pulls double duty as both drinking fountain and public restroom. Even in major cities like London or Paris, only the wealthiest homes have a rudimentary form of indoor plumbing, and by plumbing, we mean a wooden chute that guides waste into the garden. How elegant. And yes, the scent follows you. It's a mix of bodies, damp wool, burning tallow, and whatever died in the alley 2 days ago. Historians still argue over just how bad it truly was. Some suggest people were so used to the odor that they didn't even notice. Others point to travel accounts from the time people did complain, especially outsiders. One monk described a city street as a pit of steaming sin. He may have been talking about the fish market, or the tanners, or literally any corner after sunset. Let's take a little stroll, shall we? You walk past a butcher's stall. There's no refrigeration, so meat hangs in the open air, attracting a variety of FLIs that probably have their own postal system. The butcher wipes his hands on his apron, which is more blood than fabric now. You make eye contact. He smiles. You shudder. Down the road, a group of washerwomen are scrubbing clothes in the river. They're cheerful, joking, occasionally slapping laundry against rocks with the kind of force that suggests unresolved marital tension. The water they're using is the same stream someone upstream just bathed their ox in. You quietly reconsider your plans to drink anything today. As the day warms, the town becomes fragrant. Sunlight hits everything: sweaty humans, drying fish, manure piles, and begins to cook it all gently, like a horrifying pie. And no, there's no Febreze. People might carry sweet-smelling herbs, or hang posies by their beds to purify the air, but mostly they just live in the funk. You pass a small chapel, where someone has lit incense. It's the most pleasant smell you've encountered all morning. Inside, monks chant softly, their voices echoing against stone walls. It's peaceful here, quiet, holy, also slightly damp. Even divinity can't escape mildew. At this point, your nose starts to adapt. It's like visiting a farm after a while. The stink fades into the background, replaced by more pressing concerns, like, where's the cleanest place to sit? Or, did that rat just wink at you? People in the Middle Ages were not ignorant of cleanliness. They knew bad smells could make you sick. They believed in miasma, the idea that illness came from foul air. They just didn't know how it worked. Germ theory was still hundreds of years away, so they fought smells with smells. Perfumes, incense, spices, scented gloves. And yes, flowers stuffed in their sleeves. Even royalty wasn't immune. Kings might bathe more often, but their palaces still stank of unwashed laundry, chamber pots, and tightly packed nobles wearing the same velvet tunic for weeks. Servants would rush through with sweet herbs or scented oils, trying to mask the olfactory chaos. It rarely worked, but here's the surprising bit: people survived. Not everyone, of course. Life expectancy wasn't great, but people found ways to endure. They leaned into their routines. They found beauty in rituals, comfort in superstition, and yes, even a kind of joy in the chaos. And somehow, amidst all this grime and grit, they lived. They fell in love, had babies, wrote poems, composed music, built cathedrals, laughed, fought, bathed once in a while. There's something oddly inspiring about that. You take a breath through your mouth for safety and glance up at the sky. It's a little hazy, but blue. A bird circles overhead, unbothered. Somewhere a man is playing a lute terribly. A woman scolds a chicken. A child falls into a puddle and laughs like it's the best thing that ever happened. Maybe the past doesn't smell great, but it's still human. Messy, funny, strange, and worth walking through. You keep walking, trying to breathe shallowly. It's not easy. The smell is a living thing now, clinging to your clothes and politely moving in behind your ears. It has questions. You do, too, mainly. Why does everything smell like boiled cabbage, even though you haven't seen a single cabbage? But more pressingly, when, exactly, do people bathe? The short answer is, not often. The long answer involves weather, religious rules, water access, and the looming threat of demons possibly entering through your damp pores. Bathing in the Middle Ages was not as straightforward as, say, jumping into a shower and belting out your favorite tune. For one, there are no showers. And for two, singing in the bath might be seen as suspiciously joyful, maybe even sinful depending on who's watching. Let's follow a villager named Wolf. Wolf is a sturdy fellow with a good sense of humor and a smell like old soup. He's a cooper by trade. He makes barrels for wine, beer, and pickled things. His hands are calloused, and his beard is full of sawdust. He hasn't had a proper bath in about, well, depends on how you define proper. There's water in his village, sure. A small stream gurgles just past the grain mill, but it's chilly year-round and full of frogs. Bathing in cold water isn't popular unless you're a monk, a show-off, or you've fallen in by accident. For Wolf, a bath is an event. Maybe once every few months, when the weather is warm, he fills a big wooden tub with water and sits in it like a slightly confused stew ingredient. He might use lye soap if his wife hasn't run out, and maybe scrub with a rag. The water gets cloudy fast. He doesn't change it. The soap stings. The cat watches in silent judgment, and yet, Wolf emerges from the ordeal feeling his words gloriously slimy, but righteous. He'll go to church the next morning and feel like a saint, even if, by noon, he smells like smoked ham again. Bathing frequency varied wildly. In some places, especially southern Europe, where Roman bath traditions lingered, people bathed more regularly. In others, a full body bath was rare and borderline decadent. Most folks settled for wiping down important bits with cloth and water. The areas that could offend a priest or a dinner guest. Interestingly, some towns had bathhouses. They weren't fancy, but they offered hot water, steam, and sometimes food and music. In fact, they were sort of like medieval day spas, with more nudity and fewer cucumber slices. You could book a private bath, bring your own soap, and chat with neighbors while sweating out sins and staph infections. In cities like Nuremberg, bathhouses were the place to be. You might get a massage, a snack, even a little mild gossip with your soak. These were unisex for a time, too, which made things, let's say, lively. Eventually, authorities cracked down, worried that bathing and morality didn't mix well. In a steamy room full of naked people eating sausages, which brings us to the church's view on cleanliness. Let's just say it was complicated. On one hand, spiritual purity was paramount. Cleanliness could be seen as prideful or distracting. After all, if you're scrubbing your armpits, are you really thinking about God? On the other hand, monasteries did have scheduled bathing, just not often. Monks might bathe for times a year. Unless you were sick or bleeding, that was your limit. If you itched, that was a test of holiness. And maybe fleas were a divine mystery. There's also a curious little fear that bathwater opens the body, metaphorically, literally. Some believe that warm water made your pores expand, letting in evil spirits or bad air. So after a bath, it was wise to avoid going outside, talking to a witch, or listening to loud music. You might just absorb something unfortunate. Despite all this, medieval people liked being clean. When they could afford it, they embraced warm baths, sweet herbs, and fresh linens. Pilgrims would bathe before visiting holy sites. Brides would bathe before their weddings. Nobles kept scented handkerchiefs and sometimes even bath attendants. Cleanliness was admired, but it just wasn't easy. In fact, one 15th century book even recommended this bathing routine. 1. Comb your hair to remove lice. 2. Wash your hands and face every morning. 3. Brush your teeth with cloth and salt. 4. Change your shirt every few days, unless you're ill. 5. Bathe your feet weekly, because feet are traitors. Okay, we made up the last part, but you get the idea. You head back to the village square. A group of kids are splashing each other with water from a trough. They're filthy, squealing, and completely delighted. An older woman watches from her doorstep, nodding approvingly. Maybe she sees the water as wasteful, but the laughter is worth it. You pass a small hut where someone is boiling something in a large pot. You hope it's soup. It's soap, a thick, lumpy paste made from animal fat, ashes, and lye. It smells heroic, like a burned forest and sorrow. But it works, sort of. Not everyone used soap. Some just scrubbed with sand, or used herbs and oils. Others borrowed recipes from Arabic or Roman traditions, scented oils, clay powders, even flour-based rinses. Bathing wasn't universal, but it wasn't unknown either. Still, historians debate how often people truly washed. Records are spotty. Some suggest peasants bathed more often than we think, especially in summer. Others argue that bathing was rare and suspicious. One bishop reportedly scolded his priests for washing too often, fearing it made them soft. The priests probably just wanted to stop itching. You find yourself by a small stream at sunset. The water is cool, clear, and humming with insect wings. You dip a hand in. It's refreshing. You see a man wash his feet while humming a slow tune. His boots sit beside him, drying in the sun. His socks have seen things, terrible things. You sit beside him, watching the sun lower behind the hills. Despite everything, the stench, the grime, the toe-curdling recipes, this world has its own rhythm. There's a quiet dignity to people who make do with what they have, who boil soap over fire, who change shirts once a week and call it progress, who wear their sweat like a badge of courage. You breathe in deeply through your mouth again, just in case, and exhale slowly. It's not exactly spa day, but in the right light, with the right breeze, and a little distance from the chamber pot alley, the medieval world starts to smell a little like survival. The next morning, the sun is just a pale smear above the horizon when a distant bell starts ringing. It's not a wake-up call, it's a warning. You open one eye and find yourself in a cramped sleeping loft above a stable. The hay you slept on smells faintly of last week's donkey. Your limbs are stiff. Your neck is permanently shaped like a comma, and something has built a web across your left shoe. You are, technically speaking, alive. Outside, there's movement. People are pouring into the town square with buckets, sacks, baskets, anything they can carry. Today is laundry day. But wait, what did people even wash back then? Clothes. Yes, sort of, but not often, and not all of them. You'll learn this the hard way. You make your way down the narrow ladder and out into the street. It's cooler than yesterday, but only just. There's a hint of breeze, which is carrying something sour and soapy on it. You follow your nose, the edge of town. Just before the ground slants toward the river, you find the laundresses. Dozens of them, hair tied up in cloth, skirts hitched to their knees, elbows flying with military precision. They've taken over the shallow bank and transformed it into a wet, slapping, shouting battleground. Washing clothes in the Middle Ages was a full-body workout. There were no machines, no spin cycles, no stain removers, just water, soap if you were lucky, and brute force. Most of the time, people didn't wash their entire outfits, just undergarments. Those were linen, and they absorbed the most. Let's say personal aromas. You glance down at your own outfit. A heavy wool tunic, a coarse shirt underneath, leather shoes that have no memory of softness. You don't feel particularly grimy until a washerwoman yells at you from across the riverbank, "Oi, you smell like Tuesday." You're not sure what that means, but it sounds rude. The process begins. Linen shirts are soaked in cold water, then boiled with ash or lye, whatever scouring agent they have. After boiling, the garments are pounded with paddles, scrubbed with rocks, and twisted with the kind of strength that could bend horseshoes. Some washerwomen chew mint while they work, not for breath, but to avoid gagging from the water. The mint wars with the smell of boiled sweat and wet wool. No one wins. A girl no older than 12 holds up a pair of breeches and announces loudly, "This one's got more holes than my roof." Everyone laughs, except the breeches. But here's the thing, washing day was also a social event. People swapped gossip, sang songs, shared soap, and occasionally accused each other of stealing laundry soap. It was part therapy, part stand-up comedy, part very damp mob. And yes, everyone had to participate eventually, even the rich, though they didn't do their own laundry. They had servants for that. But even those servants couldn't wash everything. Heavy fabrics like wool and velvet were rarely cleaned with water. Instead, they were brushed, aired out, and sometimes beaten with sticks. It's less washing and more aggressive encouragement. You notice one woman scrubbing a tunic with such ferocity, you're surprised it doesn't confess to something. Nearby, another woman is laying clothes out on bushes to dry. Sun bleaching. It helps kill lice and odors. Hopefully. Kind of. Sometimes, it just bakes in the funk like a medieval microwave. You step closer and catch the scent of lye soap, sharp, earthy, and a little painful to the nostrils. One of the older women gestures for you to help rinse. You pick up a bucket, walk to the stream, fill it, and realize too late that the stream also contains an alarming number of frogs, sticks, and possibly a floating chicken feather. You dump it anyway. No one notices or cares. A lesser-known fact. There were laundry regulations. In many towns, laundry could only be done on certain days, in certain places, and using approved methods. Some cities banned people from washing clothes in fountains or public wells. Others designated laundry lanes by the river. You could be fined for washing your underpants in the wrong stream. Imagine that fine. Historians still debate how often clothes were truly cleaned. Some argue that frequent laundering was more common than we think, especially among working classes who sweated through labor daily. Others point out that fabric was expensive, and overwashing it wore it out faster. Most people had only 1 or 2 sets of clothes. You wore them until they begged for mercy. By midday, the sun is strong enough to dry the soaked garments. You help string a rope between 2 trees, pinning up a few linen shirts with bits of sharpened twig. A breeze lifts the fabric, and for a moment, the smell isn't so bad. Just earthy, alive, real. One woman plops down beside you, wiping sweat from her brow. It's honest work, she says, but it doesn't pay enough to buy new shirts. So we wash what we've got until they fall apart in our hands. She laughs, then picks up a sock and mutters, sooner than expected, apparently. You notice something peculiar. People wear clean shirts under dirty tunics. It's backwards, but clever. The linen shirt absorbs sweat and oil, while the outer, wool garment stays presentable. So while you might look like you haven't changed in weeks, underneath you're rocking a freshly boiled number that only smells faintly of river moss. Fashion meets function. As the sun begins to dip again, the washerwomen start gathering their things. Wet clothes are packed into baskets. Paddles are tucked under arms. A few stragglers are still wringing out sleeves with the resigned strength of people who know the same pile will be back next week. You walk back toward the village with them. The ground squelches slightly beneath your shoes. You're damp, sore, and vaguely proud of your contribution, even if all you did was nearly wash a shirt and offend a frog. Back in the square, the fire pits are lit. People are cooking supper. The air smells of onions, smoke, and something bread-like. You lean against a post and watch steam rise from the hot dishes. A boy chases a goat. A woman calls out to him, "Don't let it near the shirts." You smile, because here, in the thick of the stink and the scrubbing and the utterly ridiculous bucket balancing, you've found something. Norm life may be grimy, but it's not joyless. People wash because they have to, but also because it marks time. It creates space for stories, for laughter, for a fleeting sense of control over the chaos. And you, smelling vaguely of ash soap and frog water, are starting to get it. You wake the next day to the sound of someone hammering rhythmically against a barrel. It's not a warning this time, it's breakfast. Sort of. You stretch, your shoulders creaking like old hinges. Your tunic still smells faintly of river laundry and existential regret, but it's dry. That's progress. Today's task. It's time to talk about what people actually ate and why food hygiene in medieval times was often more of a theory than a practice. Let's begin with your current setting. The town's open-air cookshop. You shuffle into the marketplace and are hit immediately by a wall of smells, some of them edible. There's wood smoke, meat, cabbage, and a suspiciously fishy tang that you try not to think too hard about. You glance around at the vendors shouting prices, stirring pots, and swatting FLIs like it's a competitive sport. You're ushered to a bench beside a man chewing something that crunches aggressively. He holds out a turnip. You politely decline. Breakfast. Options are not vast. For the average person, mornings meant porridge, thin, beige, and vaguely oat adjacent. If you're lucky, someone's added a pinch of salt. If you're really lucky, no weevils. It's served from a blackened pot that looks Like it predates architecture. A ladle slaps the bowl in front of you, and steam rises earthy, bland, and surprisingly welcome. As you eat, you watch how others prepare their food. And hygiene? That's flexible. Knives are wiped on tunics. Bread is handled by fingers that look like they've just wrestled soil and lost. Communal jugs pass from mouth to mouth. A dog trots by with the stolen sausage. But here's the thing, people weren't careless. They just had different knowledge. They didn't understand germs, but they did understand that spoiled food made you sick. So, they leaned heavily on spices, salt, smoke, and vinegar, not just for flavor, but for preservation and safety. A cook near you tosses chopped onions into a pan, followed by a hunk of questionable meat. The smell is incredible. Is it lamb? Rabbit? You hope it's not rat. You decide not to ask. Most meat was boiled or stewed. Frying was expensive. Oil cost more than some animals. So everything went into a big communal pot. One-pot meals, reused daily, sometimes for weeks. Bits of last week's dinner become flavor. The stew pot isn't washed. It's seasoned. Like a cast-iron skillet's chaotic cousin. Across the square, baker opens the village oven. This is the town's big communal bakehouse. People bring their dough, marked with personal stamps or shapes so no one accidentally steals your loaf. The smell is heavenly. Fresh bread was one of the few simple joys people had. But bread came with its own hygiene roulette. Sometimes it was padded with chalk or sawdust to stretch supplies. You could break a tooth or lose your appetite, depending on the batch. In bad years, people resorted to acorns or ground-up beans. The term daily bread becomes a little more tense when it might contain bits of gravel, but food wasn't just survival, it was status. The rich had variety. They dined on game birds, honey-glazed pies, imported spices. Their kitchens had staff. Their food came plated. The poor, on the other hand, ate with their fingers or shared spoons. Your current utensil? A splintery wooden ladle that may have seen 100 mouths before yours. If it had feelings, it would be tired. You notice a child eating from a bowl of something thick and greenish. You ask what it is. Leek pottage, they reply proudly. Pottage is the king of medieval food. It's soup, stew, and mystery all in one. Made of whatever was on hand: cabbage, onions, barley, old bread, herbs, and sometimes a sad chunk of meat. It's filling, relatively clean if well boiled, and endlessly variable. There's a running joke in town. If you can chew it, it's food. If it chews back, it's Tuesday's pottage. Still, despite the questionable conditions, people did take precautions. Wells were covered. Milk was often boiled. Vegetables were peeled if there was enough left after the bugs. Ale and wine were safer than water because the brewing process killed bacteria. Children drank small beer, which sounds adorable until you realize it was low-alcohol breakfast beer and vinegar. A true hero used to clean hands, rinse vegetables, even dip meat to make it less terrifying. You watch a woman splash vinegar on a piece of cheese and it fizzes slightly. She eats it anyway. You try some ale. It's flat, warm, and slightly sour. You pretend it's good and nod like you belong. A lesser-known detail: cutlery was rare. People used knives. Forks were still suspiciously foreign in many places. Some thought they were devilish. Others just couldn't be bothered. Spoons were shared. Most folks relied on bread as a scoop, or just their fingers. You eat a few more bites and try not to think about how many hands have touched that bowl. Then again, you haven't bathed in a while either. Glass houses and all. Historians still debate how bad medieval food hygiene really was. Some argue people were extremely cautious in their own way, boiling everything, trusting their noses, and maintaining careful routines. Others point out the rates of food poisoning, parasites, and intestinal distress in written records. It wasn't glamorous, but then again, neither is your current attempt to wipe stew off your tunic using the sleeve of your tunic. By mid-afternoon, the cook shop starts winding down, vendors pack up, dogs sniff for leftovers. A man attempts to sell you a mystery pie with no visible filling. You decline. A small boy offers you a sprig of parsley and says, "For your breath." It's sweet and mildly insulting. You walk back through the market with your belly mostly full and your standards slightly lower. The scent of onions clings to your fingers. You pass a woman rubbing garlic on the doorframe of her cottage, whether to keep out sickness or neighbors, you're not sure. You've learned something important today. People may do. They figured things out. They might not have had soap on every corner or thermometers in their meat, but they had rituals, rhythms, and just enough vinegar to get by. And honestly, you're kind of craving pottage now. You wake up the next morning to the squawk of chickens and the low grumble of someone emptying a chamber pot into the alley behind the inn. It's a sound you've come to recognize, a kind of daily, wet punctuation mark on medieval living. You stretch, sniff the air, big mistake, and try to mentally prepare yourself. Today's topic is public baths. Yes, they existed. And yes, you're going. You wander through winding cobbled streets, dodging horse manure and puddles of suspicious origin, until you reach a low-timbered building with steam curling from its roof and a hand-painted sign showing two nude figures soaking in what looks like an enormous soup bowl. Welcome to the bathhouse. Now, before you get too excited, bathing in medieval times was less about candles and essential oils, and more about logistics and body odor management. It was social, often noisy, and definitely not private. Think less spa day and more lukewarm people stew with a hint of rosemary. Still, it's cleaner than anything you've seen in days. You step inside, and the warm, damp air hits you like a blanket that someone has already used. Inside, wooden tubs line the walls. Some are filled with water that's steaming, others with water that's seen better days. There's a faint whiff of soap, animal fat, and ash, and a much stronger aroma of humanity. You undress behind a tattered curtain that hides almost nothing, and try not to think about where your feet are stepping. The floor is wet and textured like porridge. You gingerly lower yourself into a tub that was probably used by 3 other people this morning, one of whom may have had a head cold. Still, it's warm and oddly relaxing. Bathhouses weren't just tolerated, they were popular in many towns, especially in the earlier Middle Ages. Some had multiple rooms, hot, warm, and cold baths, even steam rooms. They were often run by women, known as baigneurs or laundress bathers, and served as hubs of gossip, matchmaking, and general social chaos. There were even snacks. A man walks by offering warm bread with herbs. You take a piece, because who wouldn't want to eat bread while marinating in communal broth? Some bathhouses offered extras, music, massages, bloodletting. A few were known for slightly more intimate services. This blurred the lines between cleanliness and other forms of recreation, which made bathhouses controversial in some religious circles. One preacher in Paris once called them the devil's teapot. Dramatic, but memorable. Still, people didn't bathe daily. That wasn't the goal. A full bath might happen once a week for the well-off, once a month for most, and once a season if you lived in a rural village. Instead, people did something more creative: dry washing. Dry washing was like speed dating for cleanliness. You'd wipe your face, hands, and neck with a damp cloth. Sometimes vinegar was involved. If you were fancy, you might dust your underarms with herbs or talc. It wasn't perfect, but it made you socially acceptable. Your bathwater is slowly cooling. A child cannonballs into the tub next to you. You get splashed in the eye and decide this is enough luxury for one day. You climb out and are handed a roughly woven towel, the texture of burlap. As you dry off, a man next to you sneezes directly into his own beard and says, "Bless me." No one disagrees. Outside, the sun is warm, and you feel almost human. Sort of. Let's be honest. Hygiene was a moving target. Some towns had sophisticated bathhouses. Others barely had working wells. Personal cleanliness depended on money, geography, social class, and how many plagues were currently in circulation. Historians still debate the role of public baths during outbreaks of disease. Some argue that communal bathing helped spread infection. Others say the opposite, that keeping the skin clean may have protected people. There's even a theory that some bathhouses secretly added herbs or sulfur to the water to purify it. Whether it worked or just smelled worse is still unclear. You make your way through the town, now shiny and wet, and are hit with your next challenge: staying clean. Bathing was the easy part. Remaining unfilthy in a medieval world, that's where the real sport begins. Dust kicks up from the street. A nearby cart drips something sticky. A goose honks and flaps straight at you. You dodge barely and realize your tunic has a new stain. You're 5 minutes out of the bathhouse. Some people tried to combat this with layers. A clean linen shift beneath clothes helped soak up sweat and could be changed regularly. But laundry was a luxury. Water had to be carried. Soap was harsh. Most garments were spot cleaned with cold water, sun-dried, and hoped for the best. You pass a woman hanging clothes in the sun. She's slapping a dress against a wooden beam with the same energy most people reserve for enemy combatants. Her children play nearby, catching lice from each other like it's a competitive sport. You notice something. Despite the limitations, people cared. They perfumed themselves with rosemary, lavender, or crushed mint. They combed their hair with bone combs to fight lice. They scraped their teeth with linen or chewed on mint sticks. It wasn't spa-level hygiene, but it was intention, and that counts. You walk on, drier now, hair frizzed from the steam and a little itchy from the towel. But you feel oddly refreshed, less like a historical reenactor, more like a survivor. You remember the steam curling from the bathhouse roof, the bread, the gossip, the slightly too close neighbor in the tub, and realize it wasn't glamorous. But it worked, mostly, and if nothing else, it beats washing in the river while being watched by suspicious ducks. The next morning, your skin's still faintly pruny and your hair doing things that defy gravity. You're ushered out of the inn by a local man with a crooked smile and an armful of sticks. No, wait, not sticks. Tooth cleaning twigs. Today's journey? You're going to learn how people clean their mouths. Or more accurately, how they valiantly attempted to do so without modern toothpaste, toothbrushes, or even a basic understanding of enamel. As you walk beside him through the winding street, he offers you a twig and says, "Chew the end till it frays, then scrub your teeth. Keeps the rot out." It's a small branch of mastic, slightly bitter, slightly minty, not exactly Colgate, but better than nothing. This, it turns out, is your medieval toothbrush, a frayed stick, sometimes dipped in salt or ashes for added cleaning power. Other favorites included hazel, birch, and even licorice root, which made for a somewhat sweeter experience if you ignored the aftertaste of dirt. You chew and scrub. It's not terrible. Your gums tingle. Your tongue feels vaguely betrayed. People in the Middle Ages actually did care about oral hygiene, perhaps more than they get credit for. Archaeological remains show surprisingly decent teeth for many peasants, likely because their diets were low in processed sugar, but their cleaning methods were experimental. Next stop, a barber surgeon's shop. You're greeted by a chair that looks like it's doubled as a torture device, and a small table cluttered with tools that scream run. Among them, metal, picks, pliers, a bowl of herbs, and a small file that's seen far too much action. Barbers were the go-to for basic dentistry, mostly tooth pulling and advice like chew cloves or rinse with vinegar and wine. You sit politely while the barber explains the dangers of toothworms, a once popular belief that tiny creatures gnawed away at molars from within. He even offers to show you a dried up one he found last week. You decline with grace, and a hint of panic. He offers you a rinse. Wine steeped with sage and rosemary. It burns a little. You pretend it's refreshing. Across the street, a woman sells breath-freshening powders made from crushed fennel, mint, and sometimes chalk. The chalk is meant to whiten the teeth, though it mostly coats your tongue, like you've just licked a dusty windowsill. Still, one's doing it. You buy a tiny pouch and smile with gritty charm. As you move through the town, you start noticing how many people do tend to their mouths in small ways, chewing herbs, rubbing their gums with cloth, sucking on licorice roots. It's not just vanity. A sore tooth in this world is serious. There's no Novocaine, no dentist with comfy chairs and bubblegum-flavored fluoride. If a tooth goes bad, your only option is to yank it and hope the infection doesn't follow you into the afterlife. You meet a monk at the edge of a quiet garden who invites you to sit and rest. He tells you they make their own herbal mouth salves, mint, vinegar, salt, and sometimes powdered charcoal. It stings, he says, but so does judgment. You thank him and try not to show your fear. Medieval dental care didn't stop at cleaning. There were also home remedies, some questionable, some clever. Boiling roots and rinsing with the cooled water, binding cloves to your cheek with string, even inserting wax pellets soaked in honey for a sweet fix. You can imagine bees swarming toward your face and decide that's a bad plan. And yet, despite all these efforts, tooth loss was common. Smiling was selective. You notice that many people laugh with their mouths closed or use their hands to cover their teeth. Still, let's not be too smug about modernity. Historians still debate how effective some of these methods were. One theory suggests that twigs actually did a good job at dislodging food particles and that many people had strong gums from regular chewing. Others argue that abrasive pastes like those made from ground bone or ash may have done more harm than good, gradually eroding enamel. You reach the edge of the village where a field of wild mint grows. A girl sits there plucking stems, rubbing them on her teeth. She offers you one. It's sharp, fresh, and oddly invigorating. You look up at the sky, feeling a strange sense of pride. Your teeth may not be clean by modern standards, but they're participating. And honestly, considering the options, you're doing quite well. You walk back to town, mouth tingling, chewing thoughtfully on your mastic twig like some kind of retro oral hygiene champion. A passing man asks if you've got a splinter in your lips. You give him a chalky smile, and for a moment, you almost miss the gentle burn of minty vinegar. This morning, you're awakened not by roosters or chamber pots, but by a low, gurgling groan from the street outside. Curious and just a little concerned, you peer out the window. There, wobbling along like an elderly snail, is a man pushing a giant wooden barrel on wheels. It sloshes ominously. He is, as you're about to learn, today's featured professional, the medieval waste collector. And now, dear listener, it's time to talk about the less glamorous side of hygiene. You step outside and instantly regret it. The street smells like something between a soggy boot and a sick cow. Your eyes water. The air is thick, but the waste collector beams at you cheerfully and offers you a seat on his cart. You decline with a polite gag. Known in polite circles as a gong farmer and in impolite circles as several things not fit for bedtime, They were responsible for collecting human waste from cesspits, chamber pots, and the occasionally regrettable alley corner. This is your day now. You follow him down narrow lanes as he pauses at homes, lifts trapdoors, and ladles out waste with something that looks suspiciously like your grandma's soup spoon, to make a mental note never to eat soup again. He wears thick boots, a leather apron, and the kind of grin that says, "I have smelled worse." And he has. Cesspits were the standard solution for urban sanitation, deep holes dug beneath homes, inns, or communal yards, where waste collected like a slow brewing curse. These were emptied periodically by moonlight, if possible, to minimize the stench and the gossip. The job was dangerous, not just for the smell, but for real, documented risks, collapsing pits, noxious fumes, drowning. Yes, really. Gong farmers were often paid well, but socially ostracized. People appreciated their work. From a distance as you walk, you start noticing signs of the medieval sanitation system round you. Wooden chutes extending from second-story privies, gutters carved into streets, meant to channel runoff away, though they mostly channel it toward you. A woman leans out a window and dumps a chamber pot with a shout of "Gardez-le," the traditional warning in some cities before emptying waste onto passersby. You leap sideways just in time. Your foot lands in something worse. You don't ask. The streets, at least in theory, were cleaned by city authorities. Some towns employed street sweepers. Others simply let pigs roam and clean up food waste. Yes, medieval pigs were a sort of walking sanitation team. You pass one now, snorting contentedly near a cabbage leaf and something unidentifiable. Still, there were efforts to improve things. By the late Middle Ages, many towns had rules: no dumping waste near wells, fines for throwing things into the street, designated dung heaps at the edges of towns. But enforcement was tricky. You can write, "Don't throw poo" on parchment all day. Doesn't stop the wind. At a local tavern, you meet a man with suspiciously clean boots. He claims he's found a better way. A system of covered buckets swapped out daily, then dumped far outside the city. He dreams of underground channels, water flushing systems, even stone toilets with flowing drains. You tell him he's dreaming of Rome. He sighs. The Romans had everything. Indeed, ancient civilizations like Rome and Mohenjo-Daro had advanced sanitation, flush toilets, aqueducts, underground sewers. But in medieval Europe, much of that was lost. People made do with pit latrines, chamber pots, and prayers. Some monasteries and castles did better. You hear of garderobes, vertical shafts built into stone walls, where waste dropped into a pit or moat below. In theory, the breeze helped carry the smell away. In practice, well, imagine a castle with a sewage moat. You pass by a row of homes with shared latrine sheds out back. The air is marginally better here. Someone has hung dried lavender from the beams. It helps. Your guide pauses to rest. His barrel is full. You watch as he covers it with the wet cloth and starts pushing it toward the edge of town, where a designated dumping ground awaits, often in fields, far from water sources. Waste was sometimes even composted into fertilizer, though not very scientifically. Occasionally, it caused more disease than it prevented. You sit under a tree, catching your breath and trying to forget the smell. Historians still debate how widespread waste management actually was. Some towns, like London, had laws about waste disposal as early as the 1300s. Others lagged behind. But across Europe, Asia, and North Africa, methods varied widely, some surprisingly clever, others horrifyingly casual. In Japan, for example, human waste was collected and sold to farmers as fertilizer, so valuable, in fact, that landlords claimed it as part of tenants' rent. Imagine that rent negotiation. Meanwhile, in parts of the Middle East, cities like Baghdad had rudimentary drainage systems, and bathhouses doubled as communal hygiene centers. The point is, sanitation wasn't just about class or region. It was about infrastructure, innovation, and sheer willpower. As you watch the waste cart trundle into the distance, you feel a strange respect for the people who kept cities from becoming unbearable swamps. They worked at night. They risked illness. They never got thanks. You take one last breath of fresh air and retreat to your room. There, you light some rosemary in a clay bowl and wave it around like a medieval sage, smudging away the ghosts of all you've seen and smelled. Tomorrow, you promise yourself, you're going to visit someone who smells like anything else. By now, your nose has begun to recover from the trauma of yesterday. You've burned rosemary, chewed mint, and even dabbed a bit of rose water on your sleeves like a medieval influencer. You're ready sort of for today's adventure, because today, you'll be visiting a medieval public bathhouse. Yes, those existed. No. They weren't just for nobles. And yes, you'll be wearing something. Probably, your host today is a chatty woman named Anselma who runs the town's bathhouse with a blend of charm, efficiency, and a suspiciously large bucket. She claps her hands as you walk in, instantly instructing you to remove your shoes and hang up your outer tunic. You obey, though your modern sensibilities are already nervously wriggling. The room smells of steam, lavender, and boiled water, a dramatic improvement over the outside world. The walls are wooden, the ceiling's low, and condensation drips from the beams like lazy rain. There are 3 large tubs, several benches, and a hearth glowing merrily in the corner. And there are people talking, laughing, bathing. Together, you shuffle behind a screen and change into a loose shift, thankfully provided, and try not to make eye contact with anyone. Bathhouses in the Middle Ages varied widely, depending on the region and era. In much of Europe, especially during the 12th to 15th centuries, public bathhouses were common and even popular. In towns like Paris, Nuremberg, and London, they dotted the city streets, offering warm water, clean towels, and occasionally, let's say, optional companionship. You ease yourself into the tub, the heat wrapping around your sore legs and travel-weary spine. You sigh. This is nice. Almost too nice for the Middle Ages. You look around. Someone's getting a scalp massage. Someone else is being scrubbed down with the cloth dipped in rosemary water. A small tray of bread and cheese is passed around, because yes, people ate while bathing. Medieval bathing was often a social event. Friends might rent a private tub together. Couples could bathe side by side. Gossip flowed freely with the steam. And bathhouses were a place to relax, chat, and sometimes negotiate business or marriage. Anselma plops down beside you and explains that people bathe about once a week here, more if they're wealthy or unusually fragrant. Her bathhouse is open every evening, with separate times for men and women unless it's family day, which sounds both adorable and awkward. You're handed a rough linen cloth and a bowl of warmed water scented with marjoram. Scrub down, she says, then pour. You do as you're told. The cloth is scratchy but effective. You feel centuries of imaginary grime sluicing away. Despite popular myths, many people did bathe regularly in the Middle Ages, especially in cities. Monasteries had detailed bathing rules, often encouraging weekly or even daily washing. Nobles built private bath chambers. Even peasants made do with wooden tubs, heated stones, and shared rivers. So, where did the people in the Middle Ages never bathe idea come from? It's complicated. During the later Middle Ages, especially after the Black Death and through the 16th century, public bathhouses started to close. Some were linked to disease outbreaks. Others were associated with immorality, thanks to their occasional double duty as, well, brothels. Religious authorities began to frown on communal nudity, and people grew wary of water, spreading illness. But in your current timeline, the bathhouse is alive and well. A boy offers to pour rinse water over your head. You accept, eyes closed, as warm water streams down your face and through your hair. It's oddly moving. You haven't been this clean since you left the 21st century. Over in the corner, an old man is explaining that he washes his beard with beer. It gives it body, apparently. You nod respectfully. Next to you, a girl giggles as she holds a cloth over her mouth and breathes in the scent of juniper oil. It's a popular addition to bathwater, believed to help with everything from skin to spirits. You close your eyes and float a little. The tub is shallow, but it does the trick. You can hear distant church bells, the rustling of towels, the light clink of mugs being filled with ale or herbal tea. Historians still debate just how clean people really were. Some records suggest fairly regular washing, while others note laws about body odor and suspicious smells in courtrooms. The truth is, like most things, it varied by class, region, and the availability of water. In Japan, communal bathhouses sento were deeply ingrained in daily life, with hot springs onsen prized for their medicinal value. In the Islamic world, hammams offered both spiritual and physical cleansing, with beautiful tiled rooms, ritual rinses, and massage services. Compared to these, your little wooden bathhouse is humble but deeply appreciated. You finally step out, toweling off with the coarse but surprisingly soft cloth. You're handed a sprig of lavender to rub on your skin as a sort of deodorant. You smell like a walking sachet. It's delightful. As you prepare to leave, Anselma offers you a wrapped brick of her homemade soap made from lard, ash, and herbs. You thank her and vow to keep it forever, or until your next dirt-related catastrophe. You leave the bathhouse with flushed cheeks, loose shoulders, and an unfamiliar spring in your step. Everything feels a little softer now. The breeze, your tunic, even your thoughts. Tomorrow, you'll see how people cared for their skin and hair. Tonight, you sleep cleaner than you've been in centuries. You wake up to birdsong and the faint scent of lavender still clinging to your sleeve. Your hair is fluffy. Your skin is soft. You smell faintly of herbs and maybe, just maybe, dignity. But don't get too comfortable. Today, we're going deeper into medieval hygiene, right down to the hair on your head and the skin under your tunic. Because looking clean was one thing. Staying clean, that was a full-time job. Your host today is a local healer named Odelia. She doesn't exactly call herself a barber, nor a doctor, nor a perfumer, but somehow she's all three. Her cottage smells like beeswax, dried nettles, and something vaguely fermented. She wears a linen head wrap, an apron crusted with mysterious pastes, and a belt full of small pouches. She ushers you in with the enthusiasm of someone who has just brewed a new potion and needs a test subject. You volunteer bravely. First up, hair. Odelia examines your scalp like a treasure map. She tuts and mumbles something about urban fumes and spirit congestion. Then, with the confidence of a medieval salon stylist, she pulls out a mixture of vinegar, rosemary water, and crushed mint leaves. It's chilly, it's drippy, it smells like salad dressing, but it works. Your hair feels less like straw and more like something human again. Hair care in the Middle Ages wasn't universal, but it wasn't neglected either. Many people rinse their hair weekly, sometimes with beer egg yolk, or even a broth of nettles and rainwater. Combs were common, and even decorative, made of wood, horn, or bone. Some were double-sided, one for untangling, one for removing lice. Because, yes, lice were an ongoing battle, Odelia hands you a fine-toothed comb carved from bone and tells you to go hunting. You try not to imagine what you're hunting for. Next, she whips out a jar of greenish goop. Face balm, she says. For weather and spirits. You hesitate. She dabs it on your cheeks anyway. It smells like lard and wild thyme. Your skin glistens. Despite popular myths, many medieval people cared for their skin, especially those in public-facing roles, clergy, merchants, even city guards. They used ointments made from animal fats, beeswax, rose oil, and even ground pearls if they were feeling fancy and had no fear of budget spreadsheets. Odelia gives you a quick facial massage pressing along your jaw, under your eyes, over your temples, and then mutters a blessing. You feel oddly refreshed and slightly worried she's cursed your eyebrows. There's a knock at the door. A young woman enters with a cloth bundle and whispers something to Odelia. You pretend not to eavesdrop. She needs something for the spots. Odelia tells you matter-of-factly, blames the moon. You watch as Odelia mixes powdered chalk, mashed figs, and goat's milk. It smells experimental. The girl leaves with a grateful smile and a face mask you wouldn't wear to a party, but might wear to bed. Skin remedies in medieval times were a wild mix of folk tradition and half-remembered Galenic theories. Some used herbal infusions. Others turned to crushed minerals. There were remedies for freckles, sunspots, pimples, and imagine demons lurking in your pores. And makeup? Yes. Depending on the region and century, people used tinted balms, red ochre, and even lead-based powders, a decision they would later regret. Pale skin was prized in many cultures, associated with wealth and leisure, not because it was pretty, but because it meant you weren't working in the sun. You were inside, sipping wine and possibly composing lute music. Odelia, however, prefers the glow of health. She insists on finishing your routine with a dab of goose grease for luster. You go along with it, mostly because you don't want to offend the woman holding a knife-shaped spoon. She offers you a mirror. It's polished bronze, slightly warped, and doesn't flatter you, but you admit you look hydrated, maybe even luminous. Next, she hands you a small leather pouch of aromatic herbs. Hang this in your tunic, she explains. Keeps the fleas confused. Scent pouches were the medieval equivalent of deodorant meets perfume meets bug repellent. Lavender, mint, sage, and camphor were all common ingredients. You tie it around your neck like a locket. It bounces slightly as you walk. Outside, you encounter a noblewoman with perfectly plucked eyebrows and hands soft as custard. You learn she uses rose water every morning and a paste made from mashed almonds at night. She applies red pigment to her lips with a feather quill and uses powdered iris root on her hair to give it a pale shine. You nod, trying not to feel like a peasant wearing goose grease. Then you pass a merchant who swears by washing his face with cold ale and brushing his teeth with burned rosemary ash. He grins, revealing surprisingly white teeth. You're intrigued and slightly horrified. Historians still debate how widespread these practices were. While nobles and city dwellers often had access to soaps, balms, and cosmetic recipes, rural folks used what they could find: clay, charcoal, wild herbs. Some cleansers were surprisingly effective. Others were closer to dark alchemy. In some African kingdoms, for example, shea butter and scented oils were used for skin protection and adornment. In parts of China, rice water was rinsed through hair for strength and shine. And in the Islamic world, perfumes and oils were an essential part of hygiene, both religious and cultural. You realize medieval self-care was far more varied, experimental, and resourceful than you ever imagined. It wasn't Instagram ready, but it was deeply human. As the sun begins to lower, Odelia pats your cheek and sends you off with the final gift: A small pot of balm made from beeswax, tallow, and rosemary, for dreams, she says cryptically. You walk home smelling like a meadow, looking like someone who hasn't been sleeping on straw floors for a week. Tomorrow, you'll meet someone who takes grooming even more seriously, a medieval barber surgeon. Yes, it's exactly what it sounds like. You wake up to the sound of metal clinking and something being very vigorously sharpened. That sound doesn't feel particularly soothing at first until you remember today's guide is a barber surgeon. Yes, the delightful double life of a medieval man wielding scissors in one hand and a bone saw in the other. Meet Bernard. Bernard is the town's most trusted barber surgeon. He's brisk, cheerful, and alarmingly eager to show you his collection of oddly shaped tools. His shop smells of vinegar, old wood, and what might generously be called medicinal herbs. There's a cat curled in the window, and it eyes you like it's seen some things. You sit on a stool, nervously tugging at the hem of your tunic, while Bernard polishes his razor and asks if you'd like the express shave, deluxe trim, or perhaps a lancing. You politely request just a trim. Barber surgeons were the working-class heroes of medieval hygiene. Sure, physicians had the fancy robes and university degrees, but barber surgeons? They had real work to do. Shaving, tooth pulling, bloodletting, abscess lancing, minor surgeries, wound cleaning, and occasionally amputations. They were your one-stop shop for grooming and grievous injury. Bernard tilts your head back and begins shaving your chin with the calm precision of a man who's done this thousands of times. You can feel the razor glide down your skin, guided by steady hands and a mug of boiled water mixed with elderflower. You notice the tools on his shelf. Some look like scissors, others like gardening equipment. One, disturbingly, resembles an apple corer. That one's for draining boils, he says cheerfully. Very satisfying. You nod slowly and return to focusing on not breathing too hard. In medieval towns, especially in Europe, barbers often shared their shops with apothecaries or set up near markets. Their red and white poles? Yes. Those come from this exact era, the red symbolizing blood, the white for bandages. It's not just decorative, it's a warning and an invitation. Bernard hums a little tune as he snips away at your hair. He explains that styles vary: short around the ears for working men, longer and curled for nobles. A monk might go full tonsure, shaving the top of the head while leaving a ring of hair, symbolic of humility, and a built-in sunroof. He offers you a handheld mirror-polished pewter, slightly warped. You look decent, maybe even dashing, in a dusty, soap-optional kind of way. But Bernard isn't done yet. Next, he invites you to sit on the bloodletting bench. You laugh nervously. He doesn't. Bloodletting was a common medieval health practice based on the belief that illness came from imbalanced humors. Too hot, too cold, too melancholic? Just remove a bit of blood and reset the whole system. Think of it as the medieval equivalent of turning your Wi-Fi router off and on again. You decline the bloodletting and ask about dental care instead. Bernard perks up. He pulls out a pair of iron tongs that would make a blacksmith wince. Toothache? He asks. Got a worm in there, maybe? You blink. Yes, dental worms were once believed to be the cause of toothaches. Little imaginary creatures burrowing into molars, partying like it's 1099. To treat them, some barbers burned henbane, applied garlic, or just yanked the offending tooth out, preferably before breakfast. He shows you a bucket of crushed salt, mint, and charcoal used as tooth powder. You give it a try. It's gritty, smoky, and surprisingly refreshing. People also rubbed sage leaves on their teeth, rinsed with vinegar, and used sticks or cloth for brushing. Bernard then demonstrates how he sharpens his blades on a whetstone, oils the joints, and soaks his instruments in wine or vinegar. His version of sanitation. It's not hospital grade, but it's better than nothing. And some barber surgeons were shockingly effective, especially with experience. You ask him how he learned all this. Apprenticeship, he says. And a few lucky guesses. You believe him. In other parts of the world, grooming was often even more advanced. In ancient India, Ayurvedic texts included detailed grooming rituals. In the Islamic Golden Age, surgeons like Al-Zahrawi wrote extensively on surgical tools and cleanliness. In Mesoamerica, obsidian blades were used for both shaving and surgery, terrifyingly sharp and eerily sterile. You suddenly feel grateful Bernard only uses iron. He packs you a small kit before you leave: a comb, a cloth, and a tiny pot of astringent made from vinegar and rosemary. You thank him sincerely, even if you'll never look at razors quite the same again. As you step back into the street, your hair neat, your jaw smooth, and your dignity mostly intact, you can't help but wonder, did everyone really go to barber surgeons this often? Historians still debate how accessible or regular these services were. In cities and towns, barber surgeons were widely used. In rural areas, people likely relied more on family care, local healers, or sheer stubbornness. But grooming mattered, whether for health, status, or sheer practicality. You spot Bernard in the distance waving at a passing noble. He might be headed to lance a boil or cut a bishop's bangs. Either way, he's essential. Tomorrow, you'll delve into medieval clothing and how people kept all those layers even vaguely clean. Hint: it involves beating things with sticks. Today begins with the rhythmic sound of fabric being slapped against a stone. At first, you think someone's being punished. But no, it's just laundry day. And in the medieval world, laundry was less Tide Pods and tumble dry and more full body workout with river rocks. You're standing beside a stream with a group of women, all of whom look stronger than you. They've been up since sunrise, hauling baskets of clothing, linens, and mystery-stained undergarments. You're here to help, which mostly means not getting in the way. Your first job? Stirring a pot of boiling lye and rainwater. Fun. Lye made from ash is the medieval equivalent of detergent. Mix it with water, boil it over a fire, and you've got a caustic brew strong enough to dissolve sweat, oil, and probably small moral regrets. You're handed a wooden paddle and instructed to stir slowly like it's soup. A really dangerous soup. This is your introduction to fulling, a term used for the process of cleaning, thickening, and softening woolen garments. But it applies to more than just cloaks and tunics. It's the catch-all for making gross clothes wearable again. You watch as garments are dunked, wrung, beaten, and scrubbed over smooth stones. The women laugh and gossip while working, occasionally stopping to rinse their hands in the cold stream or hurl a tunic over a branch to dry. You're given a shift, a basic undergarment made of linen, and told to pound the sin out of it. You try, you really do. But laundry, it turns out, is a combat sport. Washing clothes in medieval times depended on one major factor: class. If you were wealthy, you had servants or laundresses to handle it. You might even own multiple changes of clothing. Imagine. If you were poor, you had to do it yourself, often with shared river access or communal washhouses. In cities, there were professional laundresses who charged by the item or by the filth level. Drying was done on bushes, hedges, or clotheslines. You notice this town's bushes are basically medieval drying racks. Someone hands you a bundle of damp wool and asks you to beat it for fluff. You comply. It's oddly satisfying, despite popular myths. People didn't avoid laundry entirely, they just didn't do it daily. Most undergarments were washed weekly or bi-weekly, garments for less often. Cloaks, Maybe once per season, if they were lucky, or unlucky, depending on what they'd spilled on them. You start to notice the subtle social dance of clothing. Linen shifts are the most common, worn closest to the skin. Over that, people wear woolen tunics or dresses, often undyed or muted in color. Nobles sport brighter shades, thanks to imported dyes woad, madder, saffron, and the rare, snobby purple made from sea snails. One woman shows you her family's dyeing rack, strips of fabric soaking in buckets of onion skins, elderberries, and crushed roots. She lifts out a swatch the color of stormy skies and beams with pride. You nod with the gravity this moment deserves. But laundry wasn't just about stains. It was tied to health, religion, and dignity. Clean linens were seen as moral. Dirty clothing, suspicious, possibly sinful. In fact, some medieval sermons warned against slothful garments. Priests scolded congregants for wearing clothes so dirty they could stand on their own. You look down at your shift and wonder if it qualifies. In many African kingdoms, clothing was a symbol of prestige, often made from finely woven cotton and dyed with natural pigments. In China, silk garments were gently cleaned with rice water and sun-dried in shaded courtyards. In Mesoamerica, clothing made from bark or agave fibers was washed with yucca root soap and hung on stone racks. Everywhere, people adapted to their environment and still somehow found time to look decent. A little boy runs by wearing nothing but a very long shirt. Someone yells after him, "Don't get it dirty again. We just washed that." He doesn't listen. You feel a sense of medieval solidarity. As the sun starts to lower, the stream sparkles with soap bubbles, and a breeze carries the clean smell of wet linen, wood smoke, and crushed herbs. You sit down beside a pile of folded garments and sip a cup of nettle tea. Your hands are wrinkled, your arms ache, but you feel surprisingly accomplished. Laundry, it turns out, is humbling. You ask someone how often they do this. "Every week if the weather's kind," she says. "Every 2 if it isn't," you nod. You will never again take a washing machine for granted. As you walk back to your lodgings with a bundle of clean clothes and a slightly damp tunic slung over your shoulder, you hear someone talking about a local scandal, a nobleman who wore the same undershirt 3 weeks in a row. The horror. Tomorrow, we explore the mysterious world of medieval latrines and the many places humans tried to pretend were toilets. Bring sturdy shoes. You wake up before dawn to an unsettling realization. Nature is calling, and in the medieval world, nature doesn't leave a voicemail, it shows up loud, urgent, and without indoor plumbing. Slipping into your freshly laundered tunic, you step outside into the cool morning air. You quietly ask a passerby, "Where's the bathroom?" The woman blinks at you, shrugs, and points to 3 very different places. "Depends," she says. "Do you want the hole, the bench, or the bucket?" Excellent. Let's begin your crash course in medieval human waste management. First stop, the chamber pot. You're handed a ceramic pot, delicate looking, yet deeply utilitarian. In most households, this lived under the bed or in a corner. At night, if nature knocked, you didn't stumble through dark streets, you crouched and hoped your aim was true. You stare into its perfectly innocent emptiness and consider the indignity of it all. Then you remember the alternative, walking through the mud to the public latrine in the dark, with your knees cold and your dignity in retreat. Once filled, and that's your job, not mine. The pot must be emptied, preferably not out the window. Yes, the infamous garde-lou. In some cities, people would fling waste from windows while yelling a warning like garde-lou, a mangled French phrase meaning, "Watch out for the water," to those below. One hopes they yelled loudly. You decide instead to take a morning stroll to the public latrine. It's located near the edge of town, built over a slow-moving stream. The bench is made of stone, with holes carved into it and absolutely no privacy. You exchange a silent nod with the baker already seated, trousers around his ankles, reading a psalter like it's the Times. Latrines came in many forms, simple pits in the earth, overhanging toilet towers in castles called garderobes, or shared trench-style facilities in monasteries and cities. In castles, the waste dropped into moats or cesspits. In towns, it flowed into ditches if you were lucky. If you weren't, well, it stayed. Garderobes were sometimes tucked into outer walls, shielded from view but exposed to the elements. Windy days were extra memorable. You climb into one just to try it. There's a faint draft, a suspicious smell, and the echo of every bad decision that's ever been made in here. Interestingly, the name garderobe literally means guarding the robes. People hung clothes there because the ammonia fumes were thought to deter lice. So yes, the castle toilet doubled as a medieval wardrobe. Freshener, sanitation was a communal affair, and not always an effective one. Cesspits filled up, streams got polluted. In cities like London, laws were eventually passed to limit dumping and mandate designated privy pits, but enforcement was, let's say, spotty. That's where gong farmers came in, possibly the least appreciated professionals of the Middle Ages. Gong farmers were hired to empty cesspits and transport waste outside city walls. They worked by night, wore special boots, and were paid surprisingly well for good reason. You meet one such man named Giles. He's cheerful, grizzled, and covered in things. He slaps your back like your old friends, and you nearly drop your bucket. Giles explains his process. He lowers a long-handled shovel into a deep pit, hauls out the night soil, and carts it to the fields. Farmers used human waste as fertilizer, though not without risk. Parasites, bacteria, and disease were constant companions. You nod politely and breathe through your sleeve. In other parts of the world, systems were often more advanced. Ancient Rome had aqueducts and public latrines with flowing water and communal sponges, yes, shared. The Islamic world built sophisticated sewer systems with ceramic pipes and water flushing designs. In Japan, by the Edo period, waste was meticulously collected and sold to farmers, nothing wasted. Back in your little village, however, you see a boy use a bush. No warning, no apology. It's humbling, really. You return to your lodging, carefully wash your hands with ash soap and cold water, and vow to appreciate the basic dignity of privacy next time you visit the 21st century. And yet, for all its roughness, the medieval bathroom experience was at least honest. No scented candles, no Bluetooth speakers, just you, your dignity, and a ceramic pot. Tomorrow, you'll explore the strange and steamy world of medieval bathhouses. Spoiler, it's more spa day than sanitation. You awaken the next morning with the curious twinge in your jaw. Perhaps it's all that medieval bread. Or maybe the bathhouse bard's lute was off-key enough to give you a sympathy migraine. Either way, you mutter something impolite and shuffle out in search of a healer. After all, how bad could medieval medicine really be? As you soon discover, quite. Your first stop is the apothecary, an aromatic little shop tucked between a butcher and a barrel maker. Shelves sag under the weight of glass jars, dried roots, preserved frogs, and a suspiciously excited cat. The apothecary herself, a brisk woman in an ink-stained apron, greets you with a smile that is 40% kindness and 60% herbal chaos. "What ails you, traveler?" she asks, peering into your eyes like they're weather reports. You explain your tooth pain. She nods gravely and begins rummaging through jars with names like dragon's blood resin and rat gall tincture. One smells like cinnamon. Another smells like something that should never be smelled. I recommend a clove poultice, she says, or, if that fails, we can pack the tooth with crushed sage and vinegar-soaked linen. But for stubborn cases, there's always the barber. The barber, you thank her, decline the rat gall, and follow her directions to the local barber surgeon. His shop is oddly cheerful. A striped pole spins outside, and inside it smells faintly of iron and regret. A man is getting his head shaved while another holds out a hand for bloodletting. The barber wipes his blade, offers you a stool, and says, "Toothache? Sit tight. I've got just the tool." He disappears behind a curtain and returns with something that looks like a medieval torture fork mated with a wrench. It's a dental key, used to wrench teeth from jaws in a single hopeful twist. You instinctively cover your mouth. The barber shrugs. "Or we can cauterize it instead. Fire cures nearly everything." You politely back out of the room. Medicine, in the Middle Ages, wasn't all leeches and guesswork, but it was heavily influenced by Galen's theory of the four humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Illness was believed to result from imbalances among them. Too melancholic? You've got too much black bile. Feeling feverish? Must be an excess of yellow. Cures often involved purging, sweating, bloodletting, or diet changes. And by diet, they mostly meant wine. Back at the apothecary's, you learn more about gentler remedies. Dried chamomile for sleep, willow bark for pain, not unlike aspirin, poppy syrup for forgetting things entirely. You sip a tea she brews for you, lavender, rose hips, and a hint of honey, and feel your nerves settle, if not your tooth. Still, for serious conditions, people turn to university-trained physicians. So off, you go to the nearby medical college, where a scholar in blue robes examines you with the brass urinal flask held up to the light. He squints, swirls it gently, and pronounces, "Your humors are cloudy." You ask what that means. He frowns. Probably a spleen thing. His treatment plan includes hot compresses, a gentle purge, prayer, and, if nothing improves, a change in astrology. You look up at the sky and wonder whether Mars is ever not in retrograde. Despite all this, medieval physicians were not without insight. Many understood the importance of hygiene, fresh air, and herbal treatments. Islamic scholars like Avicenna had compiled vast medical texts that were widely read across Europe. And surgical manuals, though not for the squeamish, did exist, complete with illustrated diagrams of how to properly saw a leg. You ask the physician how people dealt with broken bones. "Oh," he says brightly, "splints and prayers. And if those fail, we call the carpenter." You nod slowly and clutch your jaw a little tighter. You meet a midwife next, a kind, practical woman who specializes in childbirth, minor surgeries, and calm reassurance. She offers you a salve of beeswax and cloves, applied with a linen compress. It's warm, smells like your grandmother's kitchen, and doesn't involve fire or rat parts. She also tells you of other cures: powdered pearls for fever, moss scraped from a church wall for wounds, powdered mummy, yes, actual mummies for vitality. You stare at her, and she just shrugs. Trendy stuff. Rich folks love it. In many rural areas, healing was handled by cunning folk village herbalists, charm makers, or so-called wise women. These practitioners were often the most effective, blending observation, tradition, and a bit of theater. And yes, sometimes their remedies worked because the patient believed they would, and sometimes they were just vodka disguised as root water. You walk away with the cloth pouch of dried cloves, a slightly numb cheek, and a better understanding of how people managed to survive medieval illness. Pain was constant. Remedies were hopeful, and belief, whether in saints, stars, or sage tea, was often half the medicine. As night falls, you sit by a hearth, sipping your third cup of apothecary tea, and watching the flames flicker. Tomorrow, you'll explore the odd rituals of medieval hospitality. Spoiler, you're probably sharing a bed. You wake up stiff and a little disoriented, limbs wrapped awkwardly around to strangers and a chicken. Welcome to medieval hospitality. The hearth embers are low, the room smells faintly of hay and old socks, and someone is snoring like a lute with a broken string. You peel yourself from the warmth of the shared sleeping pile and stretch. Your shoulder makes a cracking sound that could be either healing or foreshadowing. Last night, the local inn was full, and the inn before that, and the one before that was technically just a barn. So a kindly cobbler offered you a spot by his fire, and his family, neighbors, and one sleepy goose did the same. This wasn't unusual. In fact, the medieval custom of stranger hospitality was deeply embedded in the social code. Whether you were a traveling merchant, a wandering monk, or just someone with a very long walk home, it was considered noble, pious, and sometimes necessary to offer food, shelter, and warmth to travelers. You thank your hosts and help clear away straw pallets and empty cups. The cobbler's daughter hands you a cold barley cake and a wink. You're not sure if it's a flirt or just a muscle spasm. Either way, you nod politely and head out. You make your way down a winding dirt lane, reflecting on what it means to be a guest in a time before hotels, reservations, or privacy. Even in noble households, visitors were expected to stay a while, sometimes weeks, especially if they brought news, letters, or gossip. And in royal courts, entertaining guests was a full-time operation. Minstrels, roasted peacocks, hot wine, and a game called Who Can Be More Lavish. You pass a manor house where a banner flaps lazily in the breeze. Curious, you knock. The steward answers with a cautious smile and invites you in. You're offered hand-washing water in a silver basin and then led to the hall. Dinner is already underway, and by dinner, we mean a 3-hour spectacle of bread trenchers, spicy stews, honeyed figs, and a troubadour singing a deeply confusing ballad about a goose that wanted to become a knight. You're seated near the fireplace, handed a goblet of watered wine, and served a thick slice of something that might be rabbit, or might be hope. The other guests nod to you politely, some in fur-lined tunics, some in what appear to be borrowed curtains. In medieval etiquette, hospitality meant everything. Guests were judged, ranked, and observed, but rarely turned away. Hosts were expected to show generosity even if they couldn't really afford to. It was both religious duty and social strategy. Good hosting could lead to alliances, favors, or at least better gossip. But here's the catch. You had responsibilities too. As a guest, you were expected to praise the food, flatter the children, and most crucially not overstay your welcome. 3 days is the gift, one host says, passing you a bowl of stewed lentils. After that, you're just new furniture. You smile and resolve to leave after dessert. Later, you're given a place to sleep in the loft above the stables, dry, warm, and full of horses with complex inner lives. You lay on a pile of hay covered in sheepskins and stare up at the wooden beams, wondering how many other travelers had stared at those same beams while listening to donkeys chew. Still, compared to inns, this is paradise. Medieval inns could be cozy or catastrophes. Some were cheerful alehouses with a few spare beds. Others were glorified drinking pits where you shared a mattress with two strangers and a lute. Thieves were common, so were bedbugs. And if your horse vanished overnight, well, at least you weren't the one missing. Hospitality in religious institutions was usually more reliable. Monasteries often kept guest houses where weary pilgrims could rest for free. You recall hearing of abbeys with warm bread, clean linens, and monks who offered gentle conversation and even medical care. Of course, you had to follow the rules. No loud talking, no meat on Fridays, and no stealing the altar wine no matter how curious you were. In some places, hospitality was woven into law. Norse cultures practiced guest right, a sacred promise that a guest under your roof was protected, even if they were technically your enemy. Breaking guest right was a grievous offense. Looking at you, evil Icelandic revenge sagas. By now, you're beginning to see that home in the Middle Ages wasn't just where you lived, it was where you were received. It could be a straw mat beside a fire, a hayloft above a pigsty, or a cushion in a gilded hall. What mattered was the welcome. Your hosts in the manor offer you a light breakfast, rye bread, goat cheese, and warm milk. You thank them with a polite bow, leave a few borrowed coins on the table, and make your way out into the foggy morning. Tomorrow, you'll visit a place where hospitality takes on a different flavor entirely. The medieval marketplace. Loud, chaotic, oddly scented, and full of surprises, the fog lifts by mid-morning, revealing cobbled streets glistening with dew and possibly fish water. You wrinkle your nose and step around a puddle with heroic flair. Ahead, the sounds of clanging metal, shouting, vendors, and a goat wearing a decorative bell announce your next destination. The medieval marketplace. You've arrived on market day, which, to be fair, could be any day depending on the town. Most medieval communities had at least one weekly market, while larger cities bustled with trade nearly every day. Special fairs, seasonal or religious, brought in caravans, exotic goods, and a tidal wave of smells. You're already starting to regret. As you approach the square, it's clear you're not in a modern supermarket. There's no music, no price tags, and no soothing voice reminding you that all three has discounts on cabbage. Instead, there's a man bellowing about leeks, a child chasing a goose with criminal intent, and a woman loudly insisting her turnips are blessed by saints and 3 popes. You sidestep the turnip gospel and wander deeper in its glorious chaos. Textiles flap in the wind. Scribes sit under umbrellas, ready to write letters or copy documents. A troupe of jugglers performs near a butcher's stall, a poor choice of location, given the flying cleavers. Bakers sell dark rye loaves still warm from stone ovens, and a fishmonger casually slaps cod onto a barrel with a sound that makes you reconsider lunch. There's even a man selling imported spices, though you're fairly sure at least one of them is just sand with ambition. Commerce in the Middle Ages was a matter of energy, reputation, and shouting the loudest. Haggling wasn't just common, it was expected. You try to buy a woolen cap, but the vendor raises an eyebrow and asks, "If you've seen the sheep this year?" You blink. He lowers the price. You're getting the hang of this. Currency varies by region. Some stalls take silver pennies. Others accept barter. One enterprising woman agrees to trade a sack of apples for a story and a blessing. You offer both and walk away with the juiciest apple you've tasted in a century. Markets weren't just places to buy things, they were theaters of daily life. Town criers announced news and laws. Guild members gathered to inspect and defend the quality of goods. Peddlers sang rhyming jingles to draw crowds, and moralists occasionally wandered through, clutching rosaries and muttering about vanities of the flesh. Every time someone sold dyed silk, still, beneath the noise and onion-scented air, you see the deep interconnection. A cooper buys salted fish. A tanner pays a blacksmith. A spice trader whispers secrets in Arabic to a wool merchant. Cultures mix. Languages bend. Coins change hands and return with stories attached. You pause to buy a small pouch of cloves, which now smell like relief after last week's dental adventure. The seller nods at your purchase and asks if you'd like some civet perfume to go with it. You politely decline once he explains it involves scraping scent glands from wild cats. You pass the traveling medicine man with his cart of tonics and miracle bombs. He's halfway through his pitch, One drop of this on your tongue, and you'll never fear bad dreams or goats again. A child claps. The goat nearby looks deeply offended. Beside him, a woman in a tall hat sells charms made of bone and ribbon. She offers you a sleep token, carved with odd symbols and smelling faintly of lavender and anxiety. You buy one, just in case. Not everything is fun and goose chasing. The marketplace was also where justice could be swift and public. Stocks sit empty today, but you've heard tales of thieves being shamed or worse right in the center of trade. Even so, the market was one of the few places where peasants, nobles, travelers, and monks might all cross paths. It was the heartbeat of town life, and though the road beyond it stretches long and winding, many still choose to linger here just a little longer, lost in the pulse of it all. You find a quiet corner with a bench and unwrap a small meat pie, still warm. Around you, life swirls colorful, loud, and improbably scented. You think about how markets connected more than just buyers and sellers, they connected worlds. Dried apricots from Armenia, ivory from West Africa, silk from China, and occasionally, really suspicious cheese from down the street. Tomorrow, you'll visit a quieter place, a monastery on a hill, where time moves like honey and the air smells of old books and fresh parchment. But tonight, you'll dream of clove-scented stalls, warm bread, and the sound of one very determined goat charging toward destiny. You wake to the soft toll of a bell echoing across a misty hillside. It rings slow and low, each note spaced like a pause in conversation, like an exhale in prayer. You stretch under a woolen cloak borrowed from a sleepy monk and blink into the pale dawn. Welcome to the monastery. The air smells of damp stone, crushed herbs, and something baking, perhaps bread, perhaps patience. You stand, brushing hay from your clothes, and follow the sound of chanting. The rhythm of monastic life is tightly bound, like a perfectly looped knot, and you're now part of its daily weave. The monastery is built from thick stone, weathered, smooth by centuries of wind and whispered prayers. Vines creep along the southern wall, and a dozen bees hum around the herb garden, clearly on a mission from St. Basil the Great, patron of beekeepers and apparently of early risers. A kindly brother named Thomas hands you a bowl of something that looks suspiciously like yesterday's porridge and gestures toward the chapel. You eat quietly, surrounded by the scrape of wooden spoons and the comforting creak of old benches. Monastic life is ruled by silence and bells. The hours are divided with military precision: matins, lauds, prime, terce, sext, none, vespers, compline, each a moment for prayer, reflection, or quiet labor. You'd hope to lounge around reading illuminated manuscripts, but instead you're asked to help carry buckets of water from the well, which, in fairness, is probably how monks defined spiritual growth. Still, you're not unhappy. There's peace in the rhythm and the repetition. Your mind drifts as you scrub a flagstone floor. Did that same stone echo under the feet of scribes, pilgrims, a sleep-deprived monk with opinions on punctuation? Inside the scriptorium, you marvel at the work of those ancient scribes, copying texts letter by painstaking letter under dim candlelight. Illuminated manuscripts bloom with colors and gold leaf, each page a celebration of discipline and very tired wrists. You try to copy a single sentence and end up with ink on your face and a new appreciation for patience. Brother Matthew shows you a manuscript of herbal remedies. There's one for headaches involving crushed mint, honey, and mild chanting. Another claims a mixture of garlic and ox bile can treat infections. You politely nod and wonder if they take guest suggestions, like more pillows or less bile. Not everything here is solemn. After lunch barley stew again. The brothers allow a short period of recreation. You stroll the garden with Brother Aidan, who shares that his favorite saint is St. Drogo, the patron of unattractive people and coffee houses. You find this deeply relatable. As you walk, you pass a beehive. Aidan explains how monks kept bees for wax, honey, and sometimes therapeutic stings. One particularly devout monk believed a sting to the foot could cure impure thoughts. You decide to keep your boots firmly on. Later, you help tend the herbarium rows of sage, rue, lavender, and rosemary. The smell is enough to make your shoulders relax and your thoughts drift. Lavender was used for calming nerves, rosemary for memory, and sage, well, for many things, depending on how desperate you were. Despite the calm, you notice how much is done each day. Monks rise before the sun, pray more times than you blink, copy books, garden, serve meals, clean, chant, and occasionally deal with visiting noblemen asking for blessings or financial advice. It's a life of order, devotion, and endurance. It's also sort of cozy in its own way. You spend the late afternoon sitting in the cloister walk, watching light stretch across carved pillars. A bird flutters into the courtyard, pauses near a basin of water, then flutters out again urgent, like it forgot something. The silence here is soft, not empty. It's filled with quiet footsteps, pages turning, distant singing, and the hum of bees performing their own sacred duty. Just before Vespers, the abbot invites you to sit with the brothers in the chapel. The walls glow gold in the candlelight. Voices rise in Latin chant, gentle, rhythmic, almost lullaby-like. You feel your breath slow. You feel something old and vast settle around your shoulders. As the last note fades, you walk the cloister, once more, guided by the flicker of a single candle. Your sleeping cell is spare but clean. A straw mattress, a woolen blanket, and a small carved cross above the door. You lie down, exhale, and think about everything that doesn't exist here. Clocks, alarms, rush, noise. Just bells, bees, books, and bread. Tomorrow, you'll rejoin the world outside these stone walls. You'll return to towns and taverns, to smells and spills and sarcasm. But tonight, you rest in a place where time itself feels like it's taken a vow of silence. And for once, you're perfectly okay with that. You wake to birdsong, not a chorus, exactly more of a solo performance by one extremely opinionated sparrow outside your window. Your eyes adjust to pale light, and the smell of morning bread baking somewhere in the monastery below lingers like a memory of kindness. But today, you return to the world. You bid farewell to Brother Thomas, who gifts you a small pouch of dried rosemary for remembrance, and Brother Matthew, who reminds you not to trust anyone selling eel oil. You promise to write, though you have no address and barely understand Latin. The road back to town is soft with dust and lined with damp hedges. As you walk, the smell of earth rises warm and sweet beneath your boots, and your mind drifts to a place no less sacred than a chapel. The medieval bathhouse. Yes, a bath. Soap, steam, possibly even privacy, though you don't want to get your hopes up. You reach the public bathhouse by early afternoon, nestled between a cobbler's shop and a building labeled apothecary and leech storage. Charming. The bathhouse is a squat timber building with smoke puffing gently from its roof. Vent. Inside, it's dim and hazy, lit by lanterns that flicker like sleepy fireflies. The air is thick with the scent of herbs, lavender, marjoram, maybe thyme, and something you pray is soap. This is not a Roman bath with marble columns and philosophers, nor is it a private tub with cucumber slices and a flute solo. This is medieval public bathing, and it's both community bonding and mildly terrifying. You're ushered into a changing room and handed a linen cloth the size of a very modest scarf. Then, Barefoot, you step into the warm chamber and nearly weep. Steam clings to the walls. Water trickles from wooden pipes into sunken tubs. Candles glimmer on shelves. Two older men chat amiably in a corner, comparing trench foot remedies. Someone pours hot water over heated stones, filling the room with the satisfying hiss. This is the closest you've felt to paradise since discovering soft cheese. You lower yourself into the tub. It's bliss. Your muscles unclench. Your thoughts slow. You stop smelling like boiled cabbage. Bathhouses in the Middle Ages weren't just for washing. They were social spaces, places to gossip, share news, or even get medical treatments. In some regions, they offered food and drinks. In others, companionship of the for a fee variety. You decline that particular service with a polite wave and a strategically placed linen scarf. A nearby bath attendant named Elfrida offers to scrub your back with a bundle of birch twigs. For circulation, you accept, because why not? You learn the hard way that birch twigs, while invigorating, are also slightly judgmental. Between scrubs, you hear talk of local news, a merchant's cart full of molasses overturned, a knight lost a duel to a duck possibly misheard, and the baker's wife ran off with a musician. Typical Tuesday, there's a bar of soap, yes, actual soap made from animal fat and ash, infused with herbs. It's surprisingly effective, though it leaves you smelling faintly like beef stew. You decide this is still an improvement. After soaking, you're offered a massage with warmed oil. The masseur is silent and extremely strong. You emerge 20 minutes later with no knots, no dignity, and a new understanding of your own shoulder blades. As you dry off near the hearth, you reflect on medieval hygiene again, how it wasn't always as grim as people assume. Yes, water sources were sometimes questionable. Yes, people reused bathwater, but they did wash. They did value cleanliness, especially in monasteries, cities, and among the wealthy. Still, bathing was complicated. In colder regions, or during winter, full baths were less frequent. Water had to be hauled, heated, and guarded from small animals. Some folks preferred dry bathing, wiping themselves with cloth, applying scented powders, or just changing tunics and hoping for the best. By the late Middle Ages, concerns about bathing grew. Some feared hot water opened the body to disease. Others simply couldn't afford bathhouses. Public facilities declined. Personal grooming became more about perfumes and powders than soap and scrubbing. But in this moment, in this steamy room, you feel a little kinship with those who built these bathhouses in the first place, not for luxury, but for relief, for warmth, for quiet, for a chance to stop stinking like goat and start smelling like someone with hope. You redress slowly, skin pink and pleasantly overheated, hair damp and slightly fragrant. Outside, the sky glows gold with the early evening sun. You step into it clean, relaxed, and nearly giddy. Tomorrow, you'll visit a healer's hut. Yes, that means herbs, bones, and mysterious ointments made of bee parts and prayer. But tonight you sleep fresh. You lie down in a rented-in room, linen sheets scratchy but honest. You breathe in, and instead of fish, mold, or onions, you smell thyme and birchwood and the faintest memory of lavender, and you think, cleanliness may not have been next to godliness in the Middle Ages, but it was, at least for today, next to happiness. The morning is slow, syrupy, and golden. You rise feeling like a freshly scrubbed turnip, clean, mildly confused, but ready for whatever strange remedy the Middle Ages throws at you next. And it doesn't take long. Word travels fast in medieval towns, especially when it involves new faces and the vague scent of lavender. A boy with one shoe and a spectacular cowlick finds you in the market and says the healer will see you now. You follow him past crooked doorways, down a narrow lane, and into the green-smelling heart of a village garden. The healer's hut looks like it was grown rather than built. Wattle and daub walls tangled with ivy, a thatched roof that whistles in the breeze, and bundles of herbs hanging from every beam like sleeping bats. A wooden sign reads simply, "Ailments considered. No refunds." You duck inside. It's dim, warm, and pungent with 100 different smells. Dried flowers, vinegar, wax, damp stone, and something distinctly garlicky. The healer herself is stirring something in a pot, perhaps soup, perhaps science. She looks up, squints, and says, "You're late. You weren't given a time. This is Agnes, possibly a witch, definitely not boring." She waves you toward a stool made from a tree stump and asks what's wrong. You say you're just curious. She mutters something about city folk and tosses a dried beetle into the pot. You begin your journey into medieval medicine. It's a fascinating, mildly terrifying blend of folklore, trial and error, ancient texts, and complete guesswork. Remedies are drawn from books like the Trotula and Bald's Leech Book. If you have headaches, chew willow bark. If you've got a fever, wear a necklace made from onions and coral. If your spirit feels heavy, consider a poultice made of mashed fig and goat spit. Agnes shows you her shelves. There are jars filled with powdered horn, dried lavender, rosewater, clumps of honey, garlic ropes, fennel seeds, wax figurines, and a suspicious number of leeches who look like they've seen things. You ask if the leeches actually work. She shrugs. Sometimes, but they never complain. She teaches you to make a basic sauve beeswax, olive oil, thyme, and comfrey, good for burns, bruises, and unsolicited advice. You stir the mixture carefully, wondering how much of medicine is art and how much is vibes. Agnes shares a few other treatments. For coughs, warm ale with crushed licorice root. For nightmares, chamomile under the pillow. For heartbreak, travel and nettle tea. You write this one down. Not all remedies are gentle. In one corner, there's a pig bladder filled with dried peas, meant to be worn like a charm against kidney stones. In another, a hanging bag of moldy bread, once thought to ward off infection. One very old book suggests applying fox lungs to the soles of your feet for energy. You suspect this is a prank. You learn how healers worked without microscopes, without a true understanding of germs. They watched symptoms. They observed nature. They relied on trial, tradition, and a deeply held belief in balancing the body's humors: blood, phlegm, black bile, and yellow bile. You're not entirely sure what your humor balance is, but you suspect it's mostly snacks and sarcasm. Agnes wraps a bundle of herbs in cloth and tells you to boil it in wine and inhale the steam. You don't ask what it's for. You just say thank you and accept the gift like you're being handed a recipe for stardust. Outside, you sit on a low stone wall, watching the village move around you. A man sells spoons. A woman scolds a goose. Children race with sticks and imaginary swords. And someone somewhere is probably treating a splinter with owl feathers and positive thinking. You reflect on how much healing in the Middle Ages came down to touch, care, time, and belief. People trusted herbs, prayers, and their local wise woman. They drank bone broth and hoped. Sometimes it worked. Sometimes it didn't, but the effort was there, the desire to heal, to comfort, to soothe. Even if the ingredients sounded like a potion recipe from a very chaotic wizard. Later that night, in your room above the tavern, you unwrap Agnes's herbs, light a small candle, and let the scent rise in the steam. Thyme, rosemary, and mint. Your head clears, your breath deepens, and you realize something quietly beautiful. Even in an age of leeches and bad guesses, someone still wanted you to feel better. your final morning in this peculiar, fragrant, and slightly itchy era begins with the sound of clanking buckets and a rooster who is absolutely convinced he invented noise. You rise slowly. Your limbs feel heavier today, not with fatigue, but with the soft weight of experience. Monks, bathhouses, medicinal turnips, and that one time a goose tried to steal your shoe. All of it swirling together like steam off a cauldron. You pack your things, your rosemary pouch, your jar of salve, a feather quill you have no idea how to use, and step into the sun-dappled square for one last walk through the medieval world. It's time to explore something that may not have improved your health, but certainly made life sweeter. Food. Medieval meals are nothing if not inventive. Without tomatoes, potatoes, corn, chocolate, or caffeine, people had to work with what they had, and what they had was a lot of turnips. Breakfast, if you're lucky, is bread. Not the fluffy, sourdough Instagram kind. This is rye bread, dense and honest. It can double as a weapon. You chew thoughtfully as you stroll the market, where traders shout about eels, onions, apples, and wheat with only some weevils. You visit a baker's stall where a woman named Maud sells small pastries filled with onions and cheese. She claims they're good for your mood and your bowels. You're not sure you want both at the same time, but you eat one anyway. It's oddly delightful, savory, warm, and slightly charred around the edges. As you nibble, you reflect on how different food was depending on your class. The nobility dined on elaborate feasts. Roasted peacock feathers reattached for flair, spiced wines, pies filled with songbirds. It was opulence served with gravy, but the poor, they made magic from cabbage, beans, onions, and the occasional suspicious egg. Pottage was the great equalizer, a bubbling stew of anything edible. Recipes changed by the hour depending on what was found, borrowed, or vaguely identified in the garden. Lunch arrives in the form of a bowl of barley stew with leeks and wild garlic, handed to you by a kindly woman who runs a small cookshop. You eat sitting on a bench beside a cart horse named Oswin who judges your table manners. Despite the lack of sugar or salt as we know them, flavors are surprisingly complex. Herbs are everywhere: sage, parsley, dill. Spices, if you can afford them, are precious: cinnamon, cloves, saffron. In the wealthier kitchens, spices are used in quantities that would make a modern chef faint. Historians still debate exactly how widely spices were used among common folk. Some records suggest pepper was treasured like gold. Others argue you could get a pinch if your cousin knew a merchant. Either way, people got creative. Fermented sauces, dried herbs, smoke, vinegar, honey, all to coax flavor from what little they had. You pass by a brewer's shop and are offered a taste of small ale. It's barely alcoholic and safer to drink than water, which is saying something. You sip it slowly and realize you haven't had anything remotely sweet in days. Then, you spot it. A honey cake, round, browned, and slightly sticky, sold by a boy with smudged cheeks and the confidence of someone who knows he holds treasure. You buy it, take a bite, and close your eyes. Sweet, spiced, dense with dried fruit. You could cry if you weren't so full of stew and barley. The final stop on your culinary tour is a modest kitchen behind the tavern. The cook lets you peek inside its controlled chaos. Iron pots hang over the fire. A pig's foot boils beside a dish of peas. Someone is pounding almonds into a paste for sauce. Another is plucking feathers with a look of grim determination. You ask what's for dinner. The answer, whatever survived the day. That night, your farewell meal is simple: roasted root vegetables, stale bread softened in broth, and a soft cheese that smells like ambition and socks. You eat slowly, savoring each bite as if it's your last, which, given the hygiene, it just might be. As you settle in for your final medieval sleep, lying under a blanket that smells of smoke and rosemary. You think about how people found comfort in small things. A warm bowl of soup, a shared hunk of bread, the sweetness of honey, the joy of full bellies, even when the world outside was hard and full of mud. Maybe you wouldn't survive here long. Maybe you'd complain about the lack of deodorant or the suspicious chickens or the very assertive plague rats. But tonight, you made it. You lived, bathed, ate, and endured. In a world that didn't always smell good, but somehow still felt full of life.